She tucked the pill into the pocket between her tongue and teeth, trying to avoid the taste of it. It was bitter, tasting of ash and acid. Aegis had been awake for almost 24 hours at that point, and the energizing pill was a must, taste notwithstanding. She could almost feel the jolt of it soaking into her sublingual membranes and into her head, making her eyelids less heavy by the second. Here, she handed one of the silver blister packs marked with a lightning bolt to Sentinel. He looked down at her and her bare face, heaved a sigh, and removed his own mask. She watched him work the tablet out of the foil and tuck it into his cheek. He grimaced and reached for his canteen, but she stopped him with a hand on his wrist. Don't. It needs to soak in. Tastes like shit, he grunted, and her mouth pulled up at the corner. Yeah, well, Umbral isn't usually all that worried about the taste preferences of their glorified bullet sponges. Careful. If you were about, 15,000 feet closer to the surface, you might be overheard. Umbral isn't a fan of sarcasm either. The lights were low, and the Oracle survivors were sleeping in their bunks, exhausted from the trauma of what they had just been through. Ares members were scary sons of bitches on dry land. They must have seemed like living nightmares to the group of people that had lived in solitary confinement at the bottom of the ocean for 75 years. Entire lives for some. Then, the nightmares had murdered their god. It was ugly, unceremonious, and Sentinel was adamant that none of them go back to the room that had been the heart of Oracle to mourn. Not with the guts of their holy relics spilled on the ground like refuse. Not to mention the fact that most of them had seen Oracle use the ocean to crush a man into paste. Poor Mariner. Aegis felt terrible about losing him, but something inside her had been numbed to it. Probably because she hadn't hunkered down in a filthy trench with Mariner, switching places with him on and off as they had to reload. She hadn't dug a bullet out of his shoulder with a knife, or had him take a kill shot for her, just so she didn't have to add another tally to the kill count that she wore on her heart like an invisible tattoo. Mariner hadn't hacked into Umbral's supplier accounts and fudged the numbers so she was delivered 10 times the amount of medicine that she would normally need to carry. Mariner hadn't gotten her those extra supplies so she could send them out to doctors trapped in wastelands and frozen hells that needed it so desperately. Doctors that she had worked with a long time ago, in another life. And she hadn't felt the bloody, brain-spattered hole in the back of Mariner's head, or felt his skin slip off his hand when she gripped it one last time before Umbral took him away. She hadn't crammed iodine tablets between his teeth, capsulated David's to polonium's Goliath. She hadn't stood guard as his body burned. So, yeah, she felt like shit about losing him, but his loss was a drop compared to the ocean that was Raptor and Cypher. An ocean. Christ. She really needed to get out of this giant tin can. Watching the rest of her team leave had kicked her pulse into overdrive, but once they had successfully undocked the old emergency bell and started their ascent, the anxiety had lessened. It was all out of her hands at that point, and even when they reached the surface, it was unlikely that they'd be able to make contact with Haven until someone actually arrived in person. With nothing else to do, she and Sentinel waited. Also with nothing else to do, their survivors ringed around them, watching with listless eyes. They creeped her out, even the kids, which she felt bad about. They were skinny wraiths, haunted and bereft of the only higher power they had ever known. Their entire purpose for existing was gone, and until the rest of Ares reached the surface, they were just as trapped as Sentinel and Aegis. What a miserable thing for their home to become a tomb, a prison. At the same time, she wondered if any of them would die from shock once they hit the surface, especially in the daylight. Aegis checked her supplies and counted how many knockout tablets she had on her. With some quick math, she figured the kids would only need half, but it still wouldn't be enough. If she wanted to send them up unconscious, they would have to go in 2 separate groups. Thinking like she wasn't anything that Umbral would encourage. When she had been headhunted for the megacorporation, the training she had undergone should have scraped any empathy out of her. To Umbral, the best medics were the numb ones, the ones that viewed people as machines in need of repair. But that empathy remained in her, an annoying little seed that made her second-guess herself more often than she would like. Aegis would watch Tempest and Hawkeye work, even Jester, and envy the lack of split-second hesitation they had before acting. Sentinel too, of course. As the leader, he should have been the most robotic, the most unshakable of them all. And he was, for the most part. Aegis had never seen him hesitate, ever. But sometimes she thought he might have wanted to. Probably not, though. She was probably just trying to attach emotion where there was none. A human connection. Whatever. It might have been what the kid that had approached her earlier had been searching for too. Looking up at her with wide, dark eyes, the kid had watched her for an uncomfortably long amount of time. She had taken her mask off to negotiate earlier and never replaced it. So Aegis figured it was because she didn't look nearly as terrifying as Sentinel. Still, the kid unnerved her. Finally, the kid spoke. "You look kinda like us." She squinted at them. "I don't know, kid. I don't see it personally. But you're pale, and your hair is white." It wasn't like she had vanity, not with her job. But Aegis didn't think anyone would take kindly to being compared to deep-water cult scarecrows. She thought she heard Sentinel snort behind his gas mask, but he didn't move. The kid wiped their nose on their wrist and continued to watch her. Then they spoke again. "I'm scared." Yeah, I get that. Oracle told us that up there, where you all are from, that the sun will burn us to ash. Is that true?" She cocked an eyebrow. "Do I look like ash to you?" The kid sniffled. "No, but you're wearing like the biggest clothes I've ever seen." "It's because I'm a medic, a doctor. I need extra stuff." Then another voice from the group of survivors, a woman this time. "Did you say you're a doctor?" Again, Aegis thought, in another life. "A combat medic, but close enough. Could you?" The woman swallowed and looked in the direction of where Oracle had been just hours before. "Could you look at my daughter? I think something is wrong with her and Oracle, well, we don't have Oracle any longer." Aegis didn't respond, tilting her head up to Sentinel, who was still staring straight ahead. "Go," her commander told her. "It's fine." So she did. It was ghastly. One by one, they wandered into the makeshift medical ward she set up in the hydroponics chamber, stripping off their long, threadbare gowns and letting her poke and prod their emaciated forms. Every single one of them was horribly anemic, suffering from horrific vitamin D deficiency, and a few of them had the beginning signs of scurvy. Scurvy. What was she? A sawbones for a fucking pirate ship? Scurvy. The sick little girl, though, was first. The woman who spoke up carried her in, and she had to be no more than 3. Aegis was sorting through her things, sitting on the bench she had pulled over, when the woman unexpectedly laid the child in Aegis's arms. Instinctively, she took her, and the gray, wan little thing gazed up at her, with a trust she really didn't deserve. Aegis was a medic, but she was also a soldier, a killer. She had scraped blood from her hair, pried bone shrapnel from her palms, and this woman handed her a child. "Will she be okay?" the mother asked, and even though Aegis didn't know, she thought about the hole in Cypher's skull and her true name being spit out between Raptor's teeth, and told the woman, "Yeah, I think so." "You should eat," Sentinel told her quietly, jolting her back to the present. There was finally some peace with the survivors asleep, and her commander's voice sounded louder than it should. She considered the meal bars in her pack, green and tasteless, and shuddered. "I'm good, actually." He was quiet for a long time, but then Sentinel hummed in thought before telling her that he would be right back. She didn't mind. There was next to nothing going on, and the two of them were basically in a holding pattern until the retrieval came. Aegis was supposed to be unfazed by anything, and despite the oddness of the situation, she found herself relatively calm, there at the bottom of the ocean. It made her almost bored, in a way. Maybe it was because she excelled in chaos when the world was burning. She didn't sleep, but between one blink and the next, she remembered the first time her world had burned. In snippets, only seconds long, Aegis recalled when she was a child, living in some nameless German suburb with her mother. It had started when smoke had begun blotting out the sun, a thick, gray haze. They were all supposed to ignore things like that. A Russian megacorporation, Volga, had paid all the residents a hefty sum of money to turn a blind eye to the nuclear power plant they had built nearby. Everyone knew it was a bullshit story, but everyone also knew that their houses and cars were suddenly paid off, so a little smoke was nothing. Until it was. The haze went from white-gray to steel, and finally black, like an oncoming night. Then there was the glow, vermilion and feverish. It had started on the horizon, beautiful against the black backdrop. By the time the fire reached the town, her mother was frantically trying to load the car with their belongings. When she knew it was too late for that, she shoved Aegis, or Allie back then, into the car and tried to flee. But the streets were a wall of taillights, obscured by the smoke that was heavy in the air at that point. They could barely see, and in her panic, Aegis's mother had driven them into a ditch. She pulled her young daughter from the vehicle, had her lay in the soft grass. Then, her mother covered her body with her own, fully expecting to die. The fire burned 30% of the town, but Volga got there eventually and stopped the flash fire. Aegis and her mother survived, but not everyone did, and even the survivors were suffering from burns and smoke inhalation. Volga would have let them suffer and die. Aegis knew it in her heart. It only took hours, though, for the Radiant Mercy Corps to show up and start rendering aid. They had taken her from her mother's arms, cut her singed overalls off her, and spread a healing salve on her little legs. Little Allie remembered the cornflower blue of their uniform and the golden sunbursts on the right side of their chests. That memory was what made her want to be a medic in the first place. All she had wanted for the future was to be a savior, which made her eventual place within Umbral all the more strange. After university, she ended up with Radiant Mercy, just like she had wanted. But it wasn't long before she realized that it wasn't what she thought it would be. Aegis didn't find herself in burnt-down towns or cities devastated by storms very often. Instead, she was on the battlefield, trying her damnedest to save any and every life she could. Even in the present day, she didn't know which one of her patients that Umbral wanted so badly. That night, when an early Eclipse Initiative team raided the medic tent. All she knew was that she fought to protect her people until the bitter end, making her last stand in front of field hospital beds full of people she didn't even know. Aegis was a terrible shot back then, but it was her spirit that made her desirable to Umbral. They had given her two choices: join them, live, and they wouldn't burn Radiant Mercy to the ground. Or refuse, die, but watch the core that she had spent all her life working towards being a part of be utterly decimated first. So, Alicia joined Umbral and became Aegis. And now Aegis was in an underwater habitat at the bottom of the sea with her commander and a handful of wraiths. That, and enough pressure to ground her down to her atomic structure if something went wrong. Aegis bent at the waist, absent-mindedly rubbing the burn scar on her leg, and remembered. Sentinel felt out of sorts, and he was more than fucking ready to be done with Haven. But the passage of time didn't care what he wanted. Left with only Aegis, he noticed how different it felt, just being a team of two. It had been almost 2 decades since he had operated as a single soldier for Umbral, but he didn't feel like he had much to be leading with just his medic there with him. The choice on whether to stay or go had been one of the hardest he'd ever have to make as a commander. But there wasn't exactly a hard-set rule for what to do when trapped in an underwater habitat with a bunch of cult members. So, he had given them all the best chance at survival, waiting with Aegis, in case any of the Haven occupants needed medical care. He knew it was the right choice. Sleeping in the other room, with Aegis standing guard, were people. Sentinel couldn't help but see them as numbers and figures, though. Assets for Umbral. Important, fragile ones. But they were still people. He was fucked in the head. But he already knew that. Like everything else, it barely registered with Sentinel emotionally. He was numb. But for the most part, that loyalty and drive for success that lived in him remained. Swift, efficient, and deadly. He was exactly what Umbral had raised him to be. It was a strange thing to be the son of a megacorporation, but he knew nothing else. Well, that wasn't quite true. There were fuzzy memories, an extravagant home, a bedroom with glowing stars on the ceiling, and the smell of a woman's perfume. And of course, his name, Nathaniel Delacroix. He never said it out loud, really. The words felt clumsy and foreign on his tongue. He had been Nathaniel for a scant few years, but he had been Sentinel much longer. Despite all of that, he wasn't a machine, even if rumors persisted that he was. He was a man, and as such, he had cooked before. He couldn't pinpoint why it felt so fucking stupid to do it now, though. standing over the ancient stove aboard Haven and flipping an omelet. It was probably the fact that he was still in full uniform, his rifle slung over his shoulder and shifting as he moved. When he dumped the first omelet on the plate, the clacking and jangling of his gear only made the surreal nature of it all even worse. But it was a little late at that point. He carried the ceramic plates, chipped and discolored from countless years of use, across the darkened chambers of Haven, through the scorched hole that Jester had cut in the door of the living quarters, and finally held up to his medic, who looked like she had never been more confused in her entire life. Which may have been true. Hell, Sentinel didn't know what Aegis had seen before she became part of his team. Apparently, nothing as strange as her commander delivering her a plate. "What is this?" she asked, taking it gingerly from his hand. Sentinel kept a straight face. "Omelet." "Like, with eggs?" He shrugged one shoulder. "I found some powdered eggs in one of the storage closets near the cafeteria. There's peppers and tomatoes too." Aegis blinked at him, looked down at the plate again, and then she smiled. "I never figured you for a chef, sir." "It's just eggs." With that, Aegis barked a laugh so loudly that she instantly covered her mouth with her free hand. She looked around to make sure she hadn't woken any of the Haven occupants. "Sorry," she whispered. "I think I'm going insane down here." "You and me both," Sentinel sighed, and then lowered himself to the ground, waiting for Aegis to follow suit. Sitting on the floor, Sentinel and Aegis ate. When she emptied her canteen, he handed her his, so she didn't have to get up to refill it. The commander and the medic talked, long minutes about nothing. It was camaraderie, and like his name, it felt foreign to Sentinel, but he didn't mind it. "Wait until I tell the rest of the team about this," Aegis sighed when she finished. All Sentinel said was, "No." "Only jesters then?" He narrowed his eyes at her. "Hell no. And that's an order." Aegis waved her hand dismissively, leaning back against the wall and stretching her legs out in front of her. "Fine. I wouldn't want to ruin your spotless reputation." After a moment, he mirrored her sitting position, folding his hands behind his head. "I don't like the thought of the team I'm in command of gossiping enough that I have a reputation among all of you." "It's not like that. You're just... you. Other Eclipse teams joke that you were made in a lab. You're so good at your job. It isn't a bad thing." Sentinel grunted in acknowledgement and was quiet for a few moments before speaking again. "Not in a lab, but Umbral did raise me." He didn't turn in her direction, but he could see that she was looking at him when she replied. "What does that mean?" "Just what it sounds like. When I was a kid, 6 years old I think, my father embezzled some money from the corporation he was working for. We were well off, I guess. This was in the early days of the worldwide corporate takeover, so there were still smaller corporations trying to, scratch their way to the top. The one my father worked for, Interlink Enterprises, isn't around anymore. But at that time, they were powerful enough to make him regret every move he ever made against them." "Holy shit." Aegis sounded stunned. "Yeah. It was sheer dumb luck that Umbral showed up to try and overtake the Interlink strike team at our estate. To get intel, I'm assuming. One of them must have had a soft spot or something, because I was almost dead when they brought me in. I've been with Umbral ever since." Aegis paused, rubbing a hand over her face. "I shouldn't have made a joke. I'm sorry." "Don't be," he told her. "I was a stupid kid as I got older. Reckless. Umbral gave me structure, a home, education. It could have been worse." She didn't seem convinced, and he could feel her eyes burning into him until the medic finally faced forward again and closed her eyes. "Yeah, I guess it could have been." Sentinel didn't know why he had just told her those things. It was out of character for him. But in the soft, dark quiet of Haven, without a team in danger or an enemy, it felt normal. Sentinel could also sense, though, that Aegis didn't know what to think of his confession. So he guided the conversation away from it. "You know, Mariner was the same as I am." Aegis made a small noise of surprise. "Really? Everything about him screamed civilian to me." "He was older when they brought him in, but still a kid. 12, I think. He was an orphan-turned freediving prodigy. Poor bastard." "Is it bad that it makes me feel a little less guilty to know that?" She almost whispered, as if anyone else could hear the two of them. "He doesn't have a family out there wondering about him. I mean, a family before Umbral, of course." "Of course," Sentinel echoed. Neither of them mentioned their own family that might still be out there, wondering where Elisa and Nathaniel disappeared to. He knew her story, because he was her commander. He'd seen the missing person flyer and the picture of the curly-haired, blonde 18-year-old on it, in her file. Someone missed Aegis out there in the world, but she would never be allowed to know. Sentinel felt bad about that. Something about Aegis brought that out in him. Emotions. Just brief glimpses of them. Maybe it was her spirit that still burned in her like a never-smothered ember, or the way she felt some things so strongly that it bled over to the other members of the team. A hazard, really. Something he should have reported and snuffed out. But it reminded him of the ghost of who he might have been. Like the pain-pleasure of a lance-infected wound. He liked it more than he should. He remembered how she had furiously demanded to Raptor that he survive. His personal opinion was that Aegis had forced Raptor to live, and it was the only reason he was still breathing. Not quite alive, but not dead either. Aegis had watched death steal Cypher away, and with the sheer force of her will, had pried the Reaper's fingers apart to take Raptor back. If it ever endangered any other Ares member, he'd handle it. But for the moment, he let Aegis rage, laugh, and mourn. Sentinel pretended like he hadn't heard Tempest mourning with the medic days ago through Aegis's apartment door. What he couldn't ignore, though, was the damned rift in his team. But the long hours he spent down in Haven with his medic told him that she, at least, wasn't the origin of said rift. That would make it a little easier to figure it out and make them whole again. They didn't sit there on the floor much longer, rising up and retaking their positions guarding the sleeping survivors for the last hours of their ocean floor vigil. The night cycle in the habitat ended and the day cycle began. Sentinel and Aegis let them complete their usual morning rituals, and he found himself more ambial towards the sad group. It was during the Haven inhabitants' group breakfast that the structure shuddered, and they heard the unmistakable clunk of something docking with the habitat. Relief snapped through him. Ares had made it to the surface, and sent down the rescue crew. The survivors, though, looked terrified. Sentinel was a leader, and he would lead these lost souls to the surface. And then, once he had ground under his feet, he would lead Ares home, just like he always did.